Hello everybody, this is Nick Totero, Professor of Information Technologies and Computer Science, Lakeland Community College. All right, in this video, we are going to use the OWASP framework and methodology to begin to look at a potential web server that we can attack. Now, as I mentioned in other videos, we need to suspend reality a little bit. Some of the techniques I'm going to use, obviously, I know the outcome. If I didn't know the outcome or I didn't know how long it was going to take, these things take a long time. So let's start with that. There's going to be a reasonable expectation of we need to suspend reality. The other thing is we are now again at a point in these demonstrations where I can't use live machines and you can't use live machines. I'm taking the approach that this is a pen test. This is not ethical hacking. I'm not being stealthy. I'm really, the methodology that I'm going to use on the network is extremely loud. And the web servers, a good web server or even a halfway decent web server is going to recognize it is being probed. It is being analyzed. Some of these tools are extremely loud and people don't like their web servers being probed. So it's not a suspension of reality here. It is a warning. I will not be doing these exercises against live machines. Now, I will be surfing the internet to pull down information, but you cannot use these tools on live machines in the wild. I have a test machine. It belongs to me. It's expected to be probed. It's expected to be analyzed. So just a word of warning, do not use these tools in the wild. Alrighty, so let's get started. Let me go up to my screen. There we are. And we already know what server of interest in. We've done a scan. We went out there and we looked for servers that had port 80 and port 443 open. Port 80 is HTTP. That tells us it's a web server, unsecured. Port 443, that tells it's a web server that's using HTTPS or somewhat secure. So I already know the server's IP address. Because this is a test environment, I'm going to be using the IP address. In a real situation, if this was a stress test against a server, I may have the IP address or I may be using a fully qualified domain name. Again, we're going to use the IP address. We're taking the approach that we are pen testers and we are putting a web server under stress, right? So, several tools, but before we get into the tools and actually doing the demonstration, let's use the methodology. In previous videos, I introduced this web security testing guide from OWASP. This is a manual. It's not a cookbook, but it's a manual to say these are the areas of concern. In previous videos, I talked about the top 10 security issues associated with web. This is a manual to say, you know what, you need to be testing your web server against this. In a previous video, I introduced this checklist. This is the OWASP checklist where we would go through the different categories. There's 12 different categories. I'm going to keep it real simple, right? Because I'm not a web developer, front end or back end or full stack, I'm going to go with my strengths. I'm going to be concerned with information gathering at this point. So we're going to skip the info 01 where we're doing research, looking up Google, doing other tools, and we're going to jump into the ones below it. Fingerprinting the web server, looking for other potential concerns. And with this, I'm going to be paying attention to this stuff over here. We're going to use a blanket statement. We're not going to do individuals here. We're going to do as many as we can. There's 3 tools that I want to use in this information gathering technique. The first one going to be done very, very quickly is this Wapalizer. That is something you can download from the internet. It is a browser extension. There's a free version and then there's a paid version. Obviously, the free version is very limited in what it can do, but I just want to use another tool. The other tool is one of our old friends, Nmap, and then an introduction to a tool that's dedicated to web server analysis, and that's NIC2. I'm going to be treating this as a pen test, which means I'm going to be creating reports. I'm going to create those reports as HTML so I can bring them up on a browser. So I'm going to be concerned with this particular information over here. I'm also going to be looking at things like the CWE, see what could potentially be concerned here. So I'm going to write some of this stuff down so I don't have to sit here and memorize it. If you want to write it down, you can too. But let's do a quick look at this very first one, 02 CWE 756, writing it down, and 1352. Now I will tell you, they're both very interesting. I've looked at them before, but let's take a look. All right, let's take a look at 756. Common weakness enumerator. Okay, what does this say? This product does not support custom error pages. So one of the things we may be looking in these reports, or you'll be looking for a lot of things, would be what happens if that web server hits a fault, hits an error, something happens. Obviously, we don't want it dumping itself into the operating system. That's catastrophic. But maybe we'd want it to have a custom error page saying this link is broken or whatever. The more essence of this, and the whole part of this demonstration is we're going to be looking at things. And the real essence of this is if we find them, we report them. It's not a question of an error page. It's more of a question of we want to control the action. The web developer, the front end, the back end, the full stack people, they want to control the situation. If something happens, they want to be in control of it. They don't want it just doing what it is. Okay, so that's 756. Let's look 1352. If you look up here, this is what I'm looking up. Now, this one's really interesting, or potentially interesting. This comes right out and says, this weakness category is related to the A6 category. Remember the top 10 weaknesses. If you looked at other videos, the OWASP top 10 security issues on a web page. This is 6 vulnerable and outdated components. This is, are we using the proper version of things? What's the most current web page you're using? Are things out of date? Are they out of service? Or whatever. We learned in other videos and other times during the course that these can potential lead to extreme vulnerability. So that's why it's number 6. It's we're in the top 10 here. So we know what we're kind of looking for here. Again, here is the different things, and here's the tools that they recommend. For 02, I'm going to use 3 tools. Okay, so we're up at Godzilla, and we're going to start real simple. We're going to use some very, very simple tools. One of the first tools we're going to use, I don't use it that much. I am aware of it. And if I go, and that's called Wapalizer. It is a series of tools. There's a free side, there's a pay side. So there's a whole bunch of things to do. I'm just going to use their free side, and I'm going to use their web browser plugin, and it's just going to give us some rudimentary information. But I thought I would just introduce some of the simpler tools. And since we know it's a web server, we can use a web browser to get to that server. So if I go back to Godzilla, I've already installed the plugin into this, so I don't have to go through that. It takes a little bit of time on my machine because my machine is slow. So I'm going to pause my machine until everything is up. Whenever possible, I'm going to try pausing so you guys don't have to sit here and watch 2-3 minutes of my screen coming up. So anyways, I'm at a web browser, and I'm going to go to the server that I know of. All right, quick background about this particular server. It's a full-blown web server. It's from OWASP itself. It's called the Broken Application Project. This is a web server very similar to Metasploitable that is designed with a whole bunch of weaknesses in it. We use it in pen tested practice. We would never use this in a live environment, but for pen testing and practicing and bug bounty hunting and ethical hacking, this is a very common, probably the most common tool that is used in this particular environment. Now, I'm going to do a real quick plugin. I've already installed it, I'm going to say, go out there and just kind of take a look at this information. Give it a second. And it found a whole series of information. If I export it, it will export it to a comma separated value, and I can open up with a spreadsheet or other documents. But you can see that it has, it gives me the programming languages that I use, the web server platform. It's giving me whenever possible. Remember, this is the free side, or free version. It's giving me the numbers, and these would be things that I would potentially look up. So it's a very common tool. I don't use it that much, but it is something out there and available. Let's use the tools that really can look at, probe, analyze a given server. Again, let me remind you, do not do this in the wild. Don't do this to some known server. It's going to cause those servers to go into fits. And if you're doing it from your IP address, they're going to hunt you down. Nobody likes their servers being this. So these are extremely loud, not attacks, but tests. Remember, we're treating this as a pen test. So let me go to command prompt. And the first one I'm going to use is an old tried and true friend. We're going to use Nmap. And since this is a pretty aggressive scan, I have to elevate my privileges. And you can see I've already done it many times because of the history. But I'm going to break it down this time. I'm going to be looking at port 80 and port 443. Remember, port 80 is HTTP, port 443 is HTTPS. I'm going to run a script against it, saying on those ports, run this script, which is the most vulnerable applications. So this script was written by somebody at Nmap to say, do the most vulnerable probes. All right. I'm going to give it the IP address of my target. And because this is I'm going to treat this as a pen test, I'm going to generate reports on this. I'm going to send it to an XML file, and then when it's done, I'm going to convert that XML file to an HTML file so I can look at it through just a simple web browser. I'm going to start this, but this takes a little bit of time. This takes a couple minutes. So after I start it, I'm going to pause and come back. But understand this may take 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes to run through. And away it goes. So it created it. Let me pause the screen. I'll come back after it's completed. Okay, and now I'm back. It took a little time, probably took about 298 seconds. I'm looking down here. So a little bit under 5 minutes to run. Be glad I paused it. Let's take a look at this report. Well, before I take a look at the report, I have to convert it to HTML. So let me clear this. And I'm going to use the program. So I've already done this. That's why there's history. So I'm going to take the XML program I created. It's now on the desktop, and I'm going to convert it to HTML. All right, now let's take a look at the report. In other Nmap videos, you've seen me do this, but now let's use it with a purpose. Remember, I'm treating this as a pen test, which means I'm creating reports that I can pass along to people. All right. Well, let's see if I can make it just a little bit. Doesn't want to make it bigger for me. I apologize. So it's a pretty extensive report, and we're only looking at port 80 here right now. It's showing me given vulnerabilities. It went through a whole series of HTTP vulnerable scripts. That was the whole thing with the Nmap. So a great deal of information. If I was to scroll through here, some things would spark my interest. Some of the stuff, like this one right here, this is kind of a wow for SQL injection, but I'm more concerned because my knowledge base, I'm more concerned with just like the platform and the networking aspect. I would probably turn over this SQL injection issue to somebody who's more well-versed with SQL. But let's see something that would be more of interest to me. We got, the Apache web server is vulnerable to denial of service attacks with numerous over. All right. So, and there's even a CVE here coming from 2011. So this may be something that we turn over to the networking people. We turn over to the Apache people, and we say, it appears that this version of Apache, it has some weaknesses. You need to upgrade it. Some cross-domain policy, cross-scripting. Anything else that would trigger my response or a networking person's response? Here's another one. Oh no, that's the one I saw. Again, that might be probably the 443. Yeah. So it's just reporting down here. It's the 443. Let's use one more tool. And the interesting thing, or what I find the interesting thing about this tool, is that this tool is dedicated to testing a web server. It's still command line driven. I'm going to create reports, but it goes after the web server in earnest. Nmap, fantastic. We have vulnerability script. But the tool we're going to talk about is Nikto. -H is the host. I'm going to give it the address of the host. I'm going to give it the ports that I'm interested in, 80 and 443. I'm going to say, output that information to the desktop. And this one, I'm going to convert it straight to an HTML file. Again, because of the nature of this device or this command, Nikto, it is extremely aggressive. It is going after as much information as it can find. This would alert, if this was a ethical hacking approach, this would alert the intrusion detection systems, the intrusion protection systems, the web servers would say, hey, somebody is probing me, you need to address this. But since I'm treating this as a pen test environment where the people who set up the server and set up the environment know that I'm doing it, suspension of belief here, I'm okay. Again, I'm going to pause it because this one takes really long. This one probably in the 5 to 10 minute range. Okay, about 45 minutes to run Nikto. But like I was saying before I started and I paused, it's a very, very aggressive approach. Let's take a look at its report that it created. Okay, so it's going to be far more verbose because it actually spidered down. It went down directories. It was checking SQL injections. It was checking all the different operating systems and all the different applications that were associated with it. It provided additional references, right? So it's a pretty comprehensive report. Let's take a look at a couple that we would just kind of find interesting, immediately find interesting. All right. Down in here, before we get to the secure port, we're only going to worry about the port 80. It's telling us that there's a whole bunch of directories and a whole bunch of files that are part of the web server that should not be accessible to the average person, right? There are configuration files that could have pertinent information in there. Hopefully there's not files in there that have credentials, but they could be in there. Again, it's a very weak web server. But it could have configuration information. If we were to look at some of my screen where I talk about things behind the firewall, well, the web server needs to know the address of the database server. So that might not be an address that we want the public to be available for. So if I just look at a couple of these information, they're telling us where to go, documentation, etc. This one, it does say it does contain some credentials. It doesn't really contain, unless you really drill down deep, it might be in there. But you can see I used 3 different programs. Was it Wapalizer, Nmap, and excuse me, and Nikto to really drill down into this web server. If I was to go back to my spreadsheet, I would then go through all these particular things. What was the given results? I would document, like this was a log, document results, pass along information, or try to fix it. Or if it's something very significant, like changing the web server, you would need to let people go. So we treated this as a pen test environment, not an ethical hacking environment, where we clobbered the server with a lot of information. Hopefully this video, this lecture, showed you that the amount of work and effort that is associated with a web server is immense. We covered one item or one topic out of 12. We haven't gotten into SQL injection or some of the other things where the hackers would be going after certain applications. So I'm going to keep stressing this. Web penetration, ethical hacking, bug bounty, it's the whole gambit. It's the entire platform of information technologies and computer science. So this video is about, we have to have some kind of methodology, some kind of checklist, something that we can go, and then we use the tools accordingly to find those weaknesses through some kind of stress test and fix them before these web servers or these web applications are released. So that being said, let's go out and learn something.